Imagine opening a tomb in the Egyptian desert and finding not lists of offerings or prayers to the gods, but a story. A real story with suspense, exile, combat, homesickness, and redemption. Now imagine that story is 4,000 years old, yet it reads like a psychological novel. That's the Tale of Sinuhe. Around 1962 BCE, in the 30th year of Pharaoh Amenemhat I's reign, something went catastrophically wrong in the royal palace at Itjtawy. Guards who were supposed to protect the god king instead murdered him in his bedchamber. Word spread in whispers. One man, a courtier named Sinuhe, heard the news and ran. He abandoned Egypt, crossed the desert at the risk of death, and rebuilt his life among the Bedouin tribes of Syria. Decades later, the new pharaoh called him home. This is not a fairy tale. The assassination was real. The political crisis was real. The cities, the geography, the customs, all verified by archaeology. What we can't verify is Sinuhe himself. Most scholars believe he's a fictional character, invented by an anonymous genius shortly after these events to explore the most terrifying question an Egyptian could face. What if you lost Egypt? For ancient Egyptians, exile wasn't just geographic displacement. It was spiritual death. The afterlife required burial in the Black Land with proper rituals. To die abroad was to cease existing forever. The Tale of Sinuhe became ancient Egypt's Odyssey, copied in schools for 600 years, found inscribed in tombs, written on potsherds by student scribes. The British Museum's R.B. Parkinson calls it the supreme masterpiece of Egyptian poetry, and dubs its unknown author the Egyptian Shakespeare. It's the first great novel in human literature, exploring identity, loyalty, divine providence, and what it means to belong. But this story sits at a specific, violent hinge point in Egyptian history. To understand why one man's panic flight mattered, we need to understand what was at stake in 1962 BCE, when a new dynasty was still proving itself, when the memory of civil war was fresh, and when an old king's murder could unravel everything. So, let's step into the palace at Itjtawy on the night the god king died. Before there was an assassination, there was a usurpation. Amenemhat I was not born to the throne. His father Senusret was a priest. His mother Nefret came from Elephantine, far in Egypt's south, possibly with Nubian heritage. Amenemhat climbed the ranks to become vizier, prime minister, under Mentuhotep IV, last pharaoh of the 11th dynasty. Then, around 1991 BCE, something happened. Mentuhotep IV disappears from the record. Amenemhat I appears as pharaoh, founder of the 12th dynasty. Was it a coup, an agreed succession, murder? We don't know. But Amenemhat's throne name, Wahem Masut, he who repeats births, announced a fresh start. Egypt needed one. The first intermediate period, 2181 to 2055 BCE, had fractured the kingdom into warring factions, each nome ruled by semi-independent governors. Civil war, famine, and chaos. Mentuhotep, the second of the 11th dynasty, finally reunited Egypt around 2055 BCE, but reunification was fragile. Provincial nomarchs still commanded armies. Thebes, the 11th dynasty capital in Upper Egypt, sat too far south to effectively control the delta. Amenemhat made a bold move. He relocated the capital. Not back to Memphis, the old kingdom seat, but to a new city, Itjtawy, Caesar of the two lands, built near modern Lisht on the border between Upper and Lower Egypt. Strategic geography, equal access to north and south, close to resources, projecting central authority. He also promoted Amun, a relatively obscure Theban god, to the head of the pantheon. This would shape Egyptian religion for the next 1,000 years, but it was initially a power play. linking his reign to divine favor. Yet Amenemhat's non-royal origins haunted him. To legitimize his rule, he commissioned propaganda. Two literary masterworks emerged from his court: the prophecy of Nefertiti, where a sage from centuries earlier predicts Amenemhat's rise as Egypt's savior, and later the instructions of Amenemhat, where the king's ghost warns his son about treachery. Both texts worked overtime to justify a vizier-turned-pharaoh. For 20 years, Amenemhat consolidated power. He built forts along the Nubian frontier. He restricted nomarchs' authority, standardizing administration. He launched raids into Libya and the Sinai to secure borders and resources: copper mines, turquoise, gold. He constructed a pyramid at El-Lisht, deliberately copying old kingdom styles to link his dynasty to Egypt's golden age. Everything screamed, "We are legitimate, we restore Ma'at." But here's the problem with being a non-royal pharaoh: succession is never guaranteed. In 1971 BCE, Amenemhat made a radical decision. He elevated his eldest son, Senusret, as co-regent, joint pharaoh, in year 20 of his reign. This had never been done before, at least not formally. Mother queens had ruled for boy kings, but two full pharaohs reigning simultaneously. Revolutionary. The logic was clear. If Amenemhat died, Senusret was already king. No power vacuum. No succession fight. It worked beautifully on paper. But a decade later, someone in the palace decided that one god-king ruling indefinitely was unacceptable. The timing was almost cosmically bad. Year 30 was Jubilee year, the Sed festival, a grand ritual where the pharaoh ritually renewed his divine authority, racing around markers to prove vitality, receiving homage from all Egypt. Preparation costs were massive: foreign tribute, festival supplies, propaganda inscriptions. To fund it, Amenemhat sent military expeditions. Senusret led troops west against Libyan tribes to secure plunder and captives. The co-regent was away. The palace at Itjtawy held the aging senior king, his court, his harem, and his guards. On the 7th day of Hathor, February 13th, 1962 BCE by best estimates, the palace conspiracy struck. The instructions of Amenemhat, written afterward, possibly by Senusret's propagandists, possibly by Amenemhat before death as a warning, describes the scene from the ghost king's perspective. It was after supper. Night had fallen. I granted myself a moment of rest in my bed, for I was weary. When my heart began to surrender to sleep, the weapons destined to protect me were raised against me. His own bodyguards, the men sworn to die for him, turned assassins. Amenemhat fought. If I had quickly taken weapons in my hand, I would have made the wretches retreat. But caught half asleep, alone, in darkness, he had no chance. The text adds a bitter question. Is it the custom of women to gather together assailants? A harem conspiracy. Factions among the king's wives and concubines, possibly backing a different prince for succession. Though Senusret had been co-regent for a decade. Who exactly plotted? We don't know. The texts don't name names, either because Senusret purged the conspirators and buried the scandal, or because naming them would admit the divine king's mortality. Egyptian royal ideology said the pharaoh was Horus incarnate, eternal, invincible. An assassination created theological crisis. If the god-king can be murdered, is he really divine? But news travels. Messengers raced west. In the Libyan desert, Senusret I learned his father was dead. The Tale of Sinuhe picks up here. Now His Majesty had sent an army to the land of the Chemi, Libyans. His eldest son as the captain thereof, the god Senusret, and now indeed he was returning. And the companions of the palace sent to the western side to acquaint the king's son concerning the position that had arisen in the royal apartments. Senusret didn't wait for his army. He grabbed his personal retinue and bolted for Itjtawy. The throne was his by co-regency law, but law means nothing if rivals seize the palace first. Speed was everything. The prince vanished into the desert night, racing for home. And Sinuhe, courtier, attendant in the royal harem, servant to Princess Neferu, Amenemhat's daughter, Senusret's wife, overheard a message not meant for his ears. What exactly did he hear? The text is maddeningly vague. Scholars have debated for a century whether Sinuhe was involved in the plot and fled before arrest, panicked at succession chaos, fearing factional purges, heard something compromising about Senusret's claim, or simply lost his nerve in a moment of existential terror. Sinuhe himself can't explain it. The text records his psychological breakdown. My heart was not in my body. My limbs shook. I was transported to the place of weariness. Fight or flight instinct hijacked him. Before rational thought returned, he was running. But running where? Egypt ended at the frontier fortifications. To flee Egypt was to abandon everything. Home, family, property, identity, afterlife. It was spiritual suicide. Yet Sinuhe ran east, toward the rising sun, toward foreign lands, toward oblivion. What came next would undo a decade of political planning, yet ironically produce Egypt's greatest story. Sinuhe's escape route follows known paths, making it eerily realistic. From Itjtawy, near modern Lisht, he travelled north toward the Nile Delta, then east. He reached the walls of the ruler, a line of fortifications and checkpoints built along Egypt's eastern frontier to control migration from Asia. Think medieval castles mixed with customs gates, watchtowers, garrisons, border inspections. The system tracked who entered and left Egypt, both for security, keeping out raiders, and ideology. Egypt was the center of civilization. Outside was chaos. Sinuhe evaded the guards. He writes, I then crouched down in a bush for fear of being seen by the watchers on duty upon the wall. This is illegal border crossing. Egypt's borders weren't lines on a map, but lived spaces, soldiers, patrols, bureaucracy. Getting past meant moving at night, avoiding roads, using terrain. He succeeded. Then came the Sinai Desert. Modern humans with GPS, water bottles, and emergency beacons still die in the Sinai. Bronze Age fugitives. The text doesn't sugarcoat. I made my way in the nighttime. When it was dawn, I had reached Pithom. I alighted at an island of the bitter lakes. Thirst's attack overtook me, and I was scorched, my throat parched. I said, "This is the taste of death." He thought he was dying. Near the bitter lakes, modern Suez Canal area, hallucinating from dehydration, Sinuhe collapsed. But then, cattle loan. A Bedouin sheikh who'd once traded in Egypt recognized him. The tribe gave him water. Here's where the story gets politically fascinating. The sheikh immediately sent Sinuhe north to Byblos, Lebanon coast, then inland to Upper Itjtawy, the mountainous region of Syria-Palestine, roughly modern western Syria and Lebanon. Egyptians called the whole Levantine region Itjtawy. Upper Itjtawy was the highland interior, Lower Itjtawy the coastal strip. The inhabitants were Semitic-speaking Canaanites and Amorites, city-states, tribal territories, no centralized power. Sinuhe reaches the domain of Amunenshi, ruler of Upper Itjtawy. This prince interrogates the refugee. "Who are you? Why did you flee?" Sinuhe responds with a masterpiece of diplomatic tap dancing. He recites a long eulogy praising Senusret I's power, wisdom, and divine right to a foreign ruler, on foreign soil, while technically a fugitive. Amunenshi's response is dry comedy. "Well, that's awfully nice, but you're here." Translation: if Senusret is so wonderful, why aren't you in Egypt? But Amunenshi sees opportunity. an Egyptian courtier with military training and administrative experience. That's valuable. He offers Sinuhe asylum, marries him to his eldest daughter, grants him land called Ya, a fertile district, makes him commander of tribal troops. Sinuhe writes, "He set me at the head of his children. He married me to his eldest daughter. He let me choose for myself of his country." For a man who thought he'd die in the desert 12 hours earlier, this was a spectacular reversal. Sinuhe had landed on his feet in a foreign culture, married into the ruling family, and become a military leader. He would spend decades there, but he never stopped thinking about Egypt, because Egyptians believed something terrifying. If you die outside Egypt, your soul dies with you. Sinuhe's life in Retchenu reads like a Bronze Age Western. Tribal conflicts, cattle raids, military honors, and single combat. He describes Ya as a paradise. It was a good land called Ya. Figs were in it, and grapes. It had more wine than water. Plentiful was its honey, abundant its olives. Every kind of fruit was on its trees. Barley was there, and emmer. There was no limit to any kind of cattle. Egyptian nostalgia already creeping in. He lists resources in Egyptian terms, comparing everything to Nile agriculture. Sinuhe served Amenenhatt as military commander, leading campaigns against neighboring tribes. "I spent many years. My sons became strong men, each one controlling his tribe. He raised a family. He accumulated wealth. Travelers from Egypt who passed through would stop with him, and he'd feed them, aid them, maintaining some thread of connection to home." But the text keeps returning to his displacement. When Egyptian caravans arrived, Sinuhe would give them food and protection, because I was known and there was water with me. He was the Egyptian abroad, respected, prosperous, yet fundamentally out of place. Egyptian identity was tied to geography. You were from the Black Land. To be elsewhere, even voluntarily, meant incompleteness. Then came the challenge. "A hero of Retchenu came to provoke me in my tent. He was a peerless champion. A regional champion, think Bronze Age MMA fighter, publicly challenged aging Sinuhe to single combat. Why? Maybe tribal politics, discredit the foreign Egyptian. Maybe personal glory, kill the famous exile." The text suggests the challenger was egged on by enemies. He thought to rob me. He planned to take my cattle. The duel happens with elaborate ritual. Retchenu's tribes gathered to watch. Sinuhe prepared bow, arrows, dagger, battle axe. The challenger advanced. Sinuhe's account is terse, almost cinematic. "He charged at me. His arrows passed me by. I shot him, my arrow stuck in his neck. He fell on his nose. I felled him with his own battle axe." Victory. Sinuhe took the fallen champion's possessions, his cattle, plundered his camp. When it was dawn, all Retchenu had come, having incited its tribes and gathered its neighboring countries, and they acclaimed me. Triumph. But here's the emotional punch. Sinuhe dedicates his victory to Montu, Egyptian god of war, and immediately starts praying for return. "May God pity me. May he hearken to the prayer of one far away. May the king have mercy on me. May I be conducted to the city of eternity." City of eternity equals Egypt's necropolis. He's terrified of dying abroad. No matter how successful, no matter how beloved by his adopted people, Sinuhe feels like a ghost. And Egyptian theology said that's not metaphor. Dying outside Egypt meant no mummification, no tomb, no afterlife, eternal non-existence. Success in Retchenu felt like prolonged death. But thousands of miles away, Senusret I had become sole pharaoh, secured the throne, crushed opposition, and built a stable reign. And the king hadn't forgotten the courtier who fled on the night of crisis. What came next would test whether royal mercy could restore what panic destroyed. decree arrived in Retyenu like a thunderbolt from the past. Royal messengers appeared at Sinuhe's estate bearing a sealed document, official papyrus with Senusret I's cartouche. Egyptian protocol demanded public reading. Sinuhe describes his terror. He threw himself on his stomach in the dust, trembling, while the envoys read aloud, "Royal decree to the attendant Sinuhe. This decree of the king is brought to you to let you know that you circled the foreign countries, going from Chidem to Retyenu, land giving you to land, was the counsel of your own heart. What is it you have done that you should be acted against? You did not curse so that your speech would be reproved. Come back to Egypt. See the residence in which you grew up." The king wasn't punishing him. The king was inviting him home. Why? Political calculation. By Sinuhe's old age, Senusret I had ruled for perhaps 30 to 40 years as sole pharaoh. The succession crisis was ancient history. The conspirators were dead or forgotten. Senusret's reign was so secure he could afford mercy. Calling Sinuhe back served multiple purposes. Demonstrated royal magnanimity, the good king forgives even irrational flight. Reinforced that Egypt was the center, foreign lands peripheral, even successful exiles long for home. And showed divine order restored, Mayat allows all Egyptians to return to proper place. But there's also something personal. The decree addresses Sinuhe by name and title, recalls his youth at court, asks what he possibly did to deserve exile, notes his aging. Flight has taken its toll of you. You have aged, have reached old age. The king cares about the burial. It is no small matter that your corpse will be interred without being escorted by bowmen. Sinuhe would die abroad and be unmourned. Royal decree corrects this. Sinuhe responds with one of ancient literature's great letters, eloquent, humble, psychologically complex. What has my lord said to me that I might answer it? It is not disrespect to the god. It is the terror which is in my body, like that which caused the fateful flight. Here I am before you. Life is yours. May your majesty do as he wishes. He still can't explain why he fled. Even decades later, he calls it terror in my body, panic, not reason. But he accepts the king's mercy. He makes arrangements, turns his Retyenu estate over to his sons, who were born there and belong there, and begins the journey back. Reverse crossing. The Sinai in reverse. Back through the walls of the ruler, this time legally, with royal escort. Back to the Nile. Back to Itjtawy. Back to the palace, where the nightmare began. And when he arrives, something remarkable happens. Sinuhe undergoes ritual purification. The text describes him being brought before Senusret, barely recognizable after decades abroad. His Majesty said to one of the courtiers, "Lift him up, let him speak to me. You have aged, have reached old age. Your corpse will be interred without being escorted by bowmen." But the king doesn't punish. Instead, he presents Sinuhe to Queen Neferu and the royal princesses. Their reaction is telling. She uttered a very great cry, and the royal daughters shrieked all together. Shock, maybe recognition, maybe disbelief. This ragged, foreign-looking old man was the courtier who served them 30 years ago. Then begins the transformation. Then the royal daughters were brought in. His Majesty said to the queen, "Here is Sinuhe, come as an Asiatic, a product of nomads." The queen and princesses respond with recognition. Then I was put in the house of a royal son. Sinuhe is bathed. His beard, grown foreign style, is shaved off. His Asiatic clothes are removed. He's dressed in fine Egyptian linen. He's given a house, property, servants, food offerings. Most importantly, His Majesty had a pyramid made for me, of stone, in the midst of the pyramids. The overseer of sculptors of the pyramid drew its plan. The sculptors decorated it. A pyramid tomb, near the royal necropolis at Lisht, with full funerary equipment, statues, inscriptions. his name inscribed for eternity, his mummified body laid to rest in Egyptian soil, his soul guaranteed safe passage to the afterlife. Everything exile denied him, restored. The tale closes with Sinuhe speaking from beyond death, the whole narrative framed as his tomb autobiography, a matter brought to its end in peace. He died in Egypt. He received proper burial. Maat restored. But that triumphant ending exists because someone else, probably decades after Sinuhe's imagined death, wrote it down and turned it into literature. The question is, why? The Tale of Sinuhe wasn't just popular, it was obsessively copied. Archaeologists have found fragments on papyri, complete scrolls used in Middle Kingdom libraries, ostraca, pottery shards and limestone flakes used by student scribes, tomb walls, inscribed as part of funerary texts, New Kingdom copies, proving it remained relevant 600 years after composition. The oldest manuscript, Berlin Papyrus 3022, now in Berlin's Egyptian Museum, dates to circa 1800 BCE, reign of Amenemhat III, roughly 160 years after the events. Egyptologists believe the tale was composed shortly after the actual assassination, possibly during Senusret I's reign, 1960s to 1920s BCE, making it nearly contemporary with the crisis it describes. Why did it endure? First, it wrestles with forbidden questions. Egyptian royal propaganda insisted pharaohs were divine, eternal, invincible. But Amenemhat I was murdered by his own guards. The tale doesn't hide this. It opens with death and conspiracy. Yet it also restores order. Senusret triumphs, the exile returns, Mayat prevails. It's both subversive and reassuring, acknowledging darkness while affirming the system works. Second, it explores identity in ways Egyptians found deeply compelling. To be Egyptian wasn't just ethnicity, it was geography, religion, burial, cosmic order. Sinuhe loses all of it, succeeds abroad, yet feels hollow. His return isn't about material wealth, he was rich in retinue, but about who he is. The tale asks, can you truly leave Egypt? And it answers, no. Even if you try, you'll long to return, because Egypt is your soul's home. Third, it's brilliantly written. The anonymous author mixes genres, autobiography, adventure tale, royal eulogy, letter correspondence, theological meditation. The prose is taut and vivid. The psychology is complex. Sinuhe's panic, his guilt, his yearning, his fear before the king. R.B. Parkinson, who translated the Oxford edition, calls the author the Egyptian Shakespeare for good reason. This is world-class storytelling. Fourth, it teaches. Scribe schools used Sinuhe as a teaching text because it modelled proper Egyptian, grammar, vocabulary, epistolary format, royal protocol. But it also taught values, loyalty to Pharaoh, importance of burial, Ma'at as cosmic principle. Copying Sinuhe made you a better scribe and a better Egyptian. But here's the subtle genius. The tale never fully explains why Sinuhe fled. Scholars have debated for a century. Was he guilty, innocent, panicked, cowardly, wise? The text keeps it ambiguous, forcing every generation to interpret. That ambiguity makes it timeless. Each reader projects their own fears of displacement, exile, identity crisis. The historical events behind it? Confirmed. Amenemhat I really was assassinated circa 1962 BCE. Senusret I really became sole pharaoh afterward. The instructions of Amenemhat corroborates the harem conspiracy. Archaeology confirms Egyptian contact with Rejenu, trade goods, military inscriptions, diplomatic relations. Everything fits. Sinuhe himself? Almost certainly fictional. His name, son of the sycamore, is symbolic. Sycamores were sacred to Hathor, goddess of foreign lands. The theological themes are too perfect, the letter exchange too eloquent. But his world was real. He represents what many Egyptians might have feared, that political violence could force them from home, from identity, from afterlife itself. And that fear never went away. Centuries later, during the New Kingdom, scribes still copied Sinuhe. 1,000 years after composition, the tale circulated in late period Egypt. When Jean-François Champollion deciphered hieroglyphics in the 1820s, Sinuhe was one of the first texts he translated. When modern novelists looked for Egyptian stories, they adapted Sinuhe. Naguib Mahfouz, Egypt's Nobel laureate, rewrote it in 1941, adding a fictional love triangle between Sinuhe, Amenemhat I, and a concubine. The tale conquered Egypt because it spoke to the Egyptian soul. Home matters more than success, identity more than wealth, proper death more than comfortable life. These themes resonated in 1950 BCE, in 1200 BCE, in 2025 CE. Universal, yes, but rooted in the specific trauma of one midnight in 1962 BCE, when the God King died and the world briefly came undone. What changed Amenemhat I's assassination proved that even God Kings could die violently. But the co-regency system worked. Senusret I secured the throne, the 12th dynasty survived, and Egypt entered its golden age. The Middle Kingdom would endure until circa 1802 BCE, producing monumental architecture, Senusret's pyramid at Lisht, the White Chapel at Karnak, fortresses in Nubia. Literature, Sinuhe, the eloquent peasant, Kache Peres Seneb, and stable prosperity. Who paid? The conspirators, unnamed, purged, erased. Amenemhat I, murdered despite precautions, and fictional Sinuhe, who chose or was forced to lose Egypt for decades. Real refugees too, anyone caught in succession chaos, displaced by political violence. Who benefited? Senusret I consolidated absolute power. The dynasty gained legitimacy through successful crisis management. Egyptian scribes gained the greatest literary masterpiece of the age. Future pharaohs used Sinuhe and the instructions to teach loyalty and warn against betrayal. Myth versus reality. Myth. Sinuhe was a real person whose tomb autobiography tells his true story. Reality. He's almost certainly fictional, a character created to explore Egyptian values through the lens of historical trauma. Myth. The co-regency prevented all chaos. Reality. It allowed smooth succession after assassination, but couldn't prevent the murder itself. Amenemhat still died. The system worked by minimizing damage, not by stopping violence. Myth. Egypt was a peaceful, eternal paradise. Reality. Middle Kingdom Egypt was rebuilt from civil war, ruled by a usurper dynasty, sustained by military campaigns, and vulnerable to palace intrigue. Literature like Sinuhe reveals the anxiety beneath the monumental facade. Enduring lesson, the Tale of Sinuhe poses a question that transcends Bronze Age Egypt. What makes you who you are? And what happens if you lose it? For Egyptians, that was literal. Burial in Egypt meant eternal life. Dying abroad meant oblivion. For us, it's metaphorical, but no less powerful. Identity, home, belonging, these aren't luxuries. They're existential needs. Sinuhe wins battles, gains wealth, raises a family abroad, yet feels dead inside because he's severed from his roots. The tale suggests that you can run from identity, but you can't escape it. Eventually you'll long for home, for restoration, for the place that made you. And if you're very lucky, like Sinuhe, the powers that define your world will grant mercy and call you back. But the tale also leaves us with irony. Sinuhe's panic flight, irrational and unexplained, produced the story that immortalized him. His exile, his personal disaster, became Egypt's greatest literary triumph. The courtier who fled the night the king died achieved the one thing every Egyptian craved: his name preserved forever, his story retold for millennia, his fictional soul living on in every reader who encounters his words. Ma'at restored, not through power or wealth, but through narrative, the most Egyptian immortality of all.